All right, how we doing? Welcome, everybody. We welcome you to Dialed In. I'm Thom Brennaman. We come your way twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, both on the Believe Network and right here on Chatterbox Sports. You can join us on YouTube. That's the Chatterbox Sports page. You can follow us on X, our good friend Elon Musk, X. That's at Thom Brennaman TV. Our guest today, longtime Fox broadcaster Chris Myers. He's fresh off the Daytona 500 coverage last week for Fox and has been in the NFL broadcast booth for 20 years now. We'll get to him in a minute. First, a couple of news notes, sports on the local front here in Cincinnati, and we begin in college basketball. Both local teams took major hits last night to their NCAA tournament chances. The UC Bearcats were favored by double digits at home against Oklahoma State and lost 80-76. This was the game the Bearcats needed, and I mean in the worst sort of way. But this is the same old, same old. They can't close the deal. Consider this. UC has lost 8 games in the Big 12 Conference, best conference in college basketball. They've lost 8 games by a combined 32 points, an average of 4 points per game. And now all of a sudden they're faced with reality staring them right in the eye. Back-to-back road games against a very good TCU team on Saturday, and then against top 5 power Houston on Tuesday night. Outside of winning the Big East tournament, Xavier's NCAA hopes are DUN. They're done. Dead. They lose to Providence last night, 79-75. They've won 13. They've lost 13. They've lost 3 in a row. And will play at number 7 Marquette on Sunday afternoon. And lastly, on the NFL front, still no decision on the Bengals regarding wide receiver T. Higgins. Their options are, 1, franchise tag him to the tune of about $21 million. Try to keep the band back together here in 2024. Burrow, Chase, Higgins, on and on and on. They could franchise tag him and try and trade him. Varying points of view on what that might bring back. And then the last option, which has 0 chance of happening, it would be straight business malpractice, would allow Higgins to just walk out the door as a free agent. That ain't happening. The team has until March the 5th to decide on what to do regarding the franchise tag. Chris Myers was born in March of 1959 in Miami, Florida. He began his broadcasting career, believe it or not, at the age of 16, hosting his own radio show in South Florida. 16. After college, he came back to Miami as a TV sportscaster, went to New Orleans for a bit, and then, quote-unquote, the big time he hits it in 1988 with ESPN. It was there he hosted SportsCenter, Baseball Tonight, and won an Emmy Award for the interview program Up Close, on which he was the first person to interview O.J. Simpson after both his murder trial and civil lawsuit. Chris covered the Earthquake World Series in 1989. I was there for that. The Olympic Park bombing during the Atlanta Games, the Olympic Games. And then in 1998, he made the move. ESPN on to Fox, where he remains now 25 years later, covering 5 Super Bowls, 3 BCS National Championship games, multiple World Series, boxing, even the Westminster Dog Show. He just wrapped up last week coverage of the Daytona 500 as Fox's lead voice on NASCAR since 2001. He's a husband, a father, and truly one of my favorite guys I have ever met. Not just favorite guys in television, but favorite guys on the planet. A pleasure to be joined by our good friend, Chris Myers. Boy, you look good. You look tan, You're back in your old stomping ground in Florida. Then you go back out to sunny California. I mean, you got it going on.
Well, yeah, except that we've had a lot of rain in both
Oh,
Florida. The Daytona 500 got moved back a day, and even California. We can't have when it rains out here. I tell people start squeezing lemons on their Porsches. They don't know what to do. They can't handle it. But I do want to thank you and your dad for being such great pros and good people along the way. Because I go back to covering Pete Rose my first year at
yep.
ESPN as a reporter in spring training when things happened, and your dad was such a great help, and through the years, getting to know you and the family. So it's always good to talk to you.
Thank you. You know, it was a very eventful Daytona 500. I mean, you had weather issues. You have Austin Hill. He wins it by less than a second, third straight time he's won it. I mean, what a wild weekend, right?
Yeah, this Daytona 500. Well, William Byron comes through for Hendrick Chevrolet after it ended with it was another Chevrolet. Bowman the Showman, Alex Bowman, right there, teammates, and then the flag comes out, and Ross Chastain had a chance to win it, and it's kind of an under caution, so you'd rather it just end clean, but at least they had nice weather after a delay, and yeah, the Daytona 500 every year gets bigger and bigger in terms of interest level, and I will say this just about entering another NASCAR season that it is more. You had Richard Petty celebrating his years in the sport, and he won 7 Daytona 500s and over 200 races, so the king they call. But back then he was the dominant force. There were maybe one or two or three guys could challenge him. Now you really have half the field, 20 cars that are capable of winning, especially Daytona, where the 3 previous years were long shot drivers. I think now, and this isn't just me talking, this is the manufacturers and the owners of the race teams and the drivers. It's really there's more competitive balance than there's ever been, and so that makes for better racing, whether you're on a super speedway or a short track or a roval or dirt, whatever you want to call it. They even tried dirt track racing with Bristol, which has changed this year. So, and I think that's fans I think appreciate that a lot more.
You know, I'm kind of curious, Chris, because I've never been to a NASCAR event. I remember our old boss, David Hill, many, many years ago, used to talk. This Australian guy, he had never been to a
Right?
NASCAR event. Fox gets NASCAR. He goes, and I remember I was talking to him one day. He's like, I've never seen anything like it. You say it keeps getting bigger and bigger and better and better, the Daytona 500 at least. What is that
Yes.
world like? I've never been around it, and there's the stereotype that it's primarily down in the South, and now all of a sudden
Right.
they've got events from coast to coast. What's it like, the NASCAR world?
Yeah, well, the origin of it is deep south, and building souped up engines for bootleggers to outrun the police, the local
Right.
police. Fascinating story. So, and then that's where the core is. But over the last 10, 20 years, even before that, it's really branched out. You have more drivers from places like California or Nevada, up north, Michigan, really than you do from the deep south right now. And I can describe it. It's funny, Tom, because I grew up. My 2 brothers were car guys. Older brother, younger brother, and I'd be watching football, baseball, on TV as a little kid. They're like, no, come on, let's go out to the races. They were car guys. I'm not. I was not a gearhead, and I'll never try to be a gearhead because there are people who can take cars apart and put them together and really appreciate that part of the racing. I enjoy the strategy of it and the pit crews and the personalities of drivers. It's high
Mm-hmm.
risk anyway. Some guys are gamblers, some guys are people. Now there's a lot more of the computer dialing into the car before you even get in, and that helps to make it, I think, more competitive balance. But yeah, the first time. So when I went to it, even David Hill, our boss, he said, "Hey, we want you to host this pre-race show. We got the rights." I said, "Well, I'm a broadcaster, and I have interviewed some of the greats in the sport, from Richard Petty to the late Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon." I said, "But I have this is the sport I've covered, like football, baseball, basketball." And he said, "No, that's what we want. We want a sports guy who learns the rules, but we want to broaden the audience. You'll have a crew chief as an analyst, or an ex-crew chief. You'll have pit reporters. You'll have an ex-driver as an analyst." And that really, I think, set the tone for the Fox approach. And they tried some things differently when they first got it. People were skeptical and critical. Oh, they're going to jazz it up. They're going to turn it into the Simpsons or whatever. And kind of took the NFL on Fox approach of personality and then highlight the sport. But yes, when I first went in to a place like Daytona, and I had been to some other smaller tracks, but the volume, the sound, the sight, the bright colors of the cars, and that's what catches some of the younger viewers or younger fans of the sport. But it really, Tom, smells like action. That's how I would describe it.
Wow.
Yeah, just there's some motor oil and there's some smoke and that type of thing. But when you're there, and it's a great TV sport because we have the great sound system. We can put cameras in the helmet in different places. But I do think once you experience it at a racetrack, I think you become more of a fan. And there are some rule, little nuances to understand, pit stops and fuel mileage, things like that. But the variety of tracks and racing personalities, I think, have kept it afloat at a time, to be honest with you, where, I think you'll agree with this. You have kids, our car connection has changed a little bit. It used to be you owned a car for a long time, and some people still do. It was, you knew the manufacturers, and those are the ones that raced, and you race in that car, and you try to sell that car in NASCAR. People lease cars, kids get around on Uber and Lyft today. So there's a little bit of a dynamic there that's changed, and yet this great American sport has tried to maintain its connection with the public, with their cars, and keep it a high risk, high reward kind of race.
I want to go back to when you started at ESPN back in 1988. You were in New Orleans. And for a lot of the younger generation now, which you and I are certainly still very much a part of, but a lot of the younger generation now, you look at ESPN and it's just this behemoth, right? But in 1988, they were still really in the process. Yeah, they'd had a few years under their belt, but the building blocks of that thing. What was that like to be at ESPN in the early days before it turns into what it is now?
Yeah, and it was only one channel, right? There wasn't, ESPN Plus or ESPN2 or ESPN. And, Tom, there weren't, we didn't have all these regionals to carry games locally for teams. There wasn't an MLB network, an NFL network. And that's what made it special, even though it was growing. Like CNN had to start, 24-hour news channel. That won't exist. And we saw what happened, whether you like what they're doing now or not. But ESPN was like, yeah, sports are nice, but who's going to watch sports for 24 hours? And especially when they didn't have the rights to anything. So when I came over from local sports, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to do it, was because in local sports, there more important things go on in the newscast, and so you get cut time-wise. And for us, it's important to get to the local sports and cover what we needed. So it was a great opportunity for me. And through the 90s, I call it the golden years, because those were really – and they can never be recaptured. Those were the special years of ESPN because they were the only game in town, because they started growing each year fast, whether it was Chris Berman with his nicknames on baseball highlights, later with Dan Patrick, just the idea that when there was breaking news anywhere in sports, a college coach, an NFL, you could see a news conference and watch it live and see things for yourself. And then eventually got rights to MLB and to NFL and more and more college, and it really became a college kind of go-to, because you could see your team playing even if it was Midnight Madness or whatever. And really, the atmosphere was fun. Guys would come to work in the clothes of the teams they rooted for, their colleges. It was a lot of young people, creative, that were just trying to do behind the scenes. It took a lot of work. And it really was a fun time. You felt you were growing and building something kind of special with some good people. I actually started out as the West Coast reporter.
Right.
But they didn't, and I was one of the first. Jimmy Roberts was on the East Coast. So they didn't even have bureaus or reporters. They would just, and so I remember interviewing, I think it was Frank Robinson at a spring training, and I was in a news guy, and I had the mic flag. I said, "Hey, can you have a question? I have a question for ESPN. Do you have a few moments?" And he said, "ESPN, was that a Spanish channel?" Everybody laughed, and then he went on to answer. So that tells you the newness of how where now you say those letters and people know it's a sports franchise and who they are. So it really has become, and I think helped pave the way. Let's give them credit for all of these other great sports channels that are out there. And then, of course, Fox, which got NFL first after The Simpsons, and then added NASCAR and baseball, and has grown now, too, although Fox is still a network. And there's FS1, this is a 24-hour sports network, but Fox, like CBS, is a network with other programming and responsibilities along with their sports. So the dynamic has changed. But I got to tell you, those are some really fun years that they'll always look back on fondly because you were building and growing with something. It was hard to leave. I really thought I'd never leave there, but a great offer came in. It had to do with the family and logistics and things like that, and another opportunity to do different things.
I want to ask you about the O.J. Simpson thing, and you know what? You might be so tired of talking about this thing because you know that moment doesn't define your career in any stretch of the imagination and all the things you've done since and the things you're continuing to do now. But that was such a incredibly explosive story that was known around the world, this great American hero, this icon, charged with murder of his wife and another young man. And then we know about the trial and everything that happens. You end up interviewing him, the first guy to do it on live television. How did that happen? What was that like?
Well, I think we were trying to get him on the show years before on Up Close, where it was a free-flowing format where you could interview a guy for a half hour, and it was an athlete, a coach, whatever, and it was their platform. And he said, I'll get on there some point, and then this happened, and then that changed everything. So after the second trial, our booking agent reached out, and his rep said, you know what, he wants to come on Chris's show because he thinks, Chris is fair on Up Close, the way he talks to, even when athletes have some difficult situations. And so, but he has two requests that have to happen. I said, well, first of all, I have to ask what I want to ask and what the public is going to ask. I'm not going to sit there and talk about your Heisman and your days in Buffalo. And he said, well, no, his only two guidelines, you can't ask about his children, which I thought was fair. And he wants the interview to be live. It has to be live. I was like, well, okay, we don't usually go live on this. We tape it and turn around, but I'll go live if ESPN will support me on that. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, Barbara Walters was going to do the first interview with him after, but she would only tape it. And she was concerned because OJ was so good at spinning his story and his lies, as it turns out, that she wouldn't do it live. He offered that to her. So she said, it's got to be taped. He said, no. So he did this with us, and it was supposed to be a half hour. We got going. We expanded. It was almost 55 minutes. You can still watch it on YouTube. And Tom, it's not an old subject because OJ Simpson keeps popping up every once in a while. And I run into people our age, younger, older, who were fascinated by that interview and by what came out of that. And remember, that was one of the last, because I don't know that there'll ever be another sports story like this one, because the way it played out on TV with the trial and the first beginning, right, with the chase in the middle of an NBA game. And it's one of the last water cooler moments where people that weren't even sports fans, because OJ prior to that was so popular, commercials, announcing, and then the player that he was, and in movies and that type of thing. So people all had an opinion and all had an interest, and were gathered around for all of that trial. And then when this opportunity came up, we really had an audience. I remember Howard Stern commented on how good he thought the interview was. Jay Leno joked about it on the Tonight Show about some question that I had asked and turned it into a joke. And so it was one of those special moments. And I was a little hesitant about doing it. I got to be honest with you. There's some people like, well, you're going to put a killer, on the air. I said, well, he wasn't convicted. And I said, and this is not a chance for me to grill him or talk sports, but it's a chance for you, the public, to judge. And I tried to ask the questions that people wanted to ask. And I studied feverishly in the time I had. I mean, I met with lawyers, I met with detectives, I met with ex-judge. I mean, it was, I was so consumed, I'd be at home and, they'd say, pass the salt, and I'd go, object. And they're like, relax, Chris, you're not on yet. All right, hold on a second. So anyway, it was fascinating still to this day. And there is a book coming out, Tom, that I'm involved in writing, and it's set for next fall, November, that'll have some of the things you and I are talking about in, and including quite a bit on this particular chapter and things after, in, and around what happened with Mr. Simpson.
We had Bob Costas on the show not too long ago, and he was sharing the story about when he was with NBC during the Olympic Games in Atlanta. And he made the comment that now all of a sudden this man, Richard Jewell, is put out there basically on a platter for the whole world. And Bob shared with us that he continued to say to his brethren on the news side, guys, this guy can't be tried in the media here. There are no formal charges against this poor man. And we find out later, of course, he wasn't guilty. We find out that his life was just completely destroyed in every way imaginable. Did you face any sort of dilemma like that when you were covering that story for ESPN?
Yeah, thankfully, and I'm glad Bob Costas brought that up at the time and later, because it's typical, and we even see more of it now, Tom, with people rushing to judge in social media. Somebody throws out a headline that may not even be accurate, and before they do their own research, also check the resources of where the information is coming from. They're out to get people, or out to make a decision, or out to cancel it. It's just so wrong, and that happened so long ago, even at a different time, and it really was tragic. I dealt more with, when I was at those games for ESPN. In fact, we were taping up close. Charles Barkley, we were at the Commerce Center downtown, the Atlanta Commerce Center. We were on the second floor, and we'd tape something with Barkley and the U.S. basketball team earlier in the day, and then we were rewrapping something for SportsCenter that night when the bomb went off, and I thought it was fireworks at first, and then, the old training as a broadcaster, you roll right through it, and then they're like, hey, we turned around, we saw sirens, and at the time, we rushed down and stayed on live for ESPN because we didn't know if there were more bombs or if it was terrorists or what was going on. But in the aftermath, thankfully, I was not on the Richard Jewell assignments of covering that. However, I was also very cautious that, like, what evidence do you have? It just seemed like they were in such a hurry to pin it on somebody. And this was a guy who actually, and I didn't see him personally doing this, but I saw other people helping to get people to safety, and to tend to those who were either panicked or had been injured from some of the debris. And it was really unfortunate, and I don't think a lesson was learned, at least not by many, unfortunately.
You come to Fox after 10 years at ESPN, and you brought it up earlier with SportsCenter, Baseball Tonight, Up Close, all these different things. Primarily, almost exclusively, a studio guy. And as you know, in that world of television, there is such a separation between studio and play-by-play guys, right? So unless you're doing the World Series and you're hosting for Fox the pregame show for the World Series, you'll see Joe Buck or Kevin Joe Davis, whoever it might be that's doing the game. Same thing with football. But outside of that, on a week-in and week-out basis, there's that world and then there's that world. Did you want to make that move from one world to the other world all along?
Yeah, not really. It wasn't. I loved, football, baseball, and I loved the work that great announcers locally, nationally did as I was growing up, and so I had an appreciation for that. My hook into TV, other than the local radio and broadcast, Brent Musburger and the NFL Today, which was the first live half-hour pregame football show. So that was kind of what my long-range thought was. I want to be on, a show like, I'd love to host a football show like that where I can talk about all the games and watch all the games and then recap. And then you saw highlights later with Chris Berman doing it, which nobody has ever topped, with Tom Jackson, the NFL Primetime, all those highlights in a fun way. I was like, that's the kind of thing. And I did, the studio stuff, the Baseball Tonight, the interview show. And I've always enjoyed interviewing athletes before and after the game. So that's kind of where I was going with this. And because of the interview interest and approach, when I did go over to Fox, it was hosting the NASCAR and I did some studio baseball. They were like, hey, your interviews, can we use you to help out to interview this situation? They'd be live or they might be at a game. So in a sense, becoming more of a field reporter or sideline reporter when I wasn't doing the studio. And so that's how that began. A couple of postseason baseball games. Obviously the Red Sox run to the World Series in 2004 when they broke through. And I was this was before Ken Rosenthal kind of slid into that spot from his writing background. And it really wasn't an established spot there. And so and then they said, well, could you jump over to NFL and help out there? And that's how I became in NFL games, but also postseason games with Pam Oliver and the later Aaron Andrews for Super Bowls and things like that. So from doing some of that, when the studio opportunity there weren't as many of those around or available. So when I was like, hey, I want to do some play-by-play, and it was mostly football. I mean, that's where I kind of had some experience from high school and college, just doing some side play-by-play stuff. But again, that wasn't my driving force. So I kind of worked it to get into that portion of it, and that's really where I love doing. If you talk about the play-by-play, and you're right, there's still studio remote. They try to bring them together. That's one of the things too on NASCAR. When I did host, we had the Hollywood Hotel. We would be on the scene at the track because it was the only game in town, almost like the big, the Super Bowl or whatever. So that helped connect a little bit of the remote play-by-play broadcast of the event with the studio show. So I think that helped lead me into that, and have really enjoyed doing and I've done some college, and I did a little bit of baseball play-by-play, but primarily the NFL calling games in that area as far as play-by-play. It's what I really kind of got wound up into, and it really took me back to my roots of what I loved about sports, other than doing interviews.
Well, one of the games you and I had a chance to do, and I mean, everywhere I go, and maybe you're the same, everywhere I go, I get asked about that Fiesta Bowl between Boise State and Oklahoma. The way the game ended, okay, all these crazy plays, and Boise State shocks them, and they win the thing. But then we throw it down to you on the field. And I don't even know what to say about it. What is going through your mind when all of a sudden you're in the middle of a marriage proposal?
Yeah, by the way, great call at the end of that game, your preparation show, because not only did that game just end and go back and forth, I mean, it was some crazy. The plays were just, and they were well executed too. They were like just a tip ball or something freaky, and you guys were right on top. And I don't care who you were rooting for, but that game also represented, Tom, if you remember, and this was part of what happened afterwards. There wasn't a college football playoff. The teams like Boise State, they were lucky to get in bowl games. They had to beg, borrow, and steal the mighty schools with the brand names, Oklahoma, Ohio State. So there was that element going on in the world. But Boise State was good, and they earned their way in there. And then, boy, they show that others belong too. So just to go back, though, you call the end of that game, which is go back an exciting finish, and I ran up, interviewed the winning quarterback, and then I'm supposed to throw it back, and they set up the stage and do the trophy presentation, throw it back to you to stretch a little or till they get that stuff ready. So our producer was Mike Burke, so you'll remember it. So I do the quarterback, and I'm throw it back, and you guys are telling us, hey, Chris, they're not ready yet. We need, can you get another interview and just keep something moving here for a few minutes? So I see Ian Johnson, the running back who scored the winning points at the end on a crazy play. And so I see him over the corner kind of being talked to a little bit. So I run over and I said, hey, do you have a minute? Excuse me for interrupting here. We're going to go live on Fox to talk about it. He said, oh, yeah, sure, we're going to be live. And I said, yeah. On a national, I said, yeah. And he said, well, and he said something about, and this is Tom, we're rushing around as the guy with the noise. And he said something about, I want to make a proposal. Or something about a proposal. And I thought he wanted to propose a playoff system or something like that. Right. That's at least what's stuck in my head. So anyway, we do the interview. I'm doing the interview, and our producer's like, hey, got time for a few more. So I'm talking about the game, and then the great finish. And then I remember he'd been dating or talking about the cheerleader. I didn't know her name, but when we went to practice, you and I were out there at practices. So he starts she comes running over, and he looks, and something. And so the producer's rapping me like, we got to go. And he doesn't know what I heard of it. Now the proposal thing is settling into my mind. Like, oh, that's the proposal. So I didn't have time to say, and I kept waiting for him to kind of break out into it, and he's not, and I got to be wrapped. So I some people said I jumped and got rooted for it, but I was like, hey, you're going to do a proposal here or what? I forget exactly how I said it, but as she came running over, he goes, oh yeah. And he kneels down, he goes, would you marry me? And I put the mic in there. I was like, Tom, she said yes. And I threw it back up to you because I was just as dumbfounded. Usually I could be cool in an interview with an athlete, but that was one of those things, especially after that game and that finish, that we didn't expect. And that people still come up to me every year when that game comes around. And by the way, Ian Johnson, Chris Peterson, the coach, who's now a broadcaster in the studio, he said, "Yeah, that was great. We waited, and it was we knew that he wanted to do that, so we didn't really tell anybody. But Ian Johnson thanked me for later because he said I kind of forgot, and I wanted to do it on the big stage. I left the ring back at the hotel room or something, but we didn't know we were going to have the kind of game we're going to have. And they're still married with doing well from the last I had heard within the last year. So we did some good there."
Yeah, absolutely. You did some good there. That was phenomenal stuff. Hey, but before I let you go, I want to ask you a little bit about the NFL. When you and I were growing up, baseball was by far and away the most popular sport. I think you could make an argument that basketball might have been the second most popular sport, maybe running neck and neck with football there. Now, all of a sudden, Chris, as you and I well know, I mean, it is here and everybody else is down here. It's not to diminish the other sports in any way, but the fanaticism behind the National Football League and a college game for that matter, but the NFL, why do you think they've separated themselves so much from the other sports?
Well, I don't have all the answers, but having grown up through it, and I was a fanatic NFL fan even before it became so big growing up. Number one, it's TV has really helped it, and the right usage of TV with even going to instant replay, with officials questioning, and everybody's an expert. You can see angles, and you have an opinion on it. I think that's certainly television that has put money into it. They've gotten the ratings out of it. It was slowly building. I think it's an action, fast-moving sport, Tom, too, that, baseball in person, it's a different type of thing. NASCAR, yeah, there's action, but there's a lot of lulls. In football, it could snap out at any moment. And I think more and more identity with cities like we always had and their heroes. And it's become a year-round sport in the sense that they've categorized, they carefully kind of planned where you do a little draft and you have a free agent period. We have a schedule release, and these things have built on so that they keep your attention year round. And so those things kind of all add up. And I think it's good timing. I think you're right. Things have evolved. Once it was baseball and, America's pastime, it'll always be labeled as that. And then, the NBA and those Magic and Bird years and what Michael Jordan did. So sometimes it's the stars of the sport as well. But the NFL had that, but now they've gotten to the point where somebody comes along, he's a new star, even if it's just for a year, puts the helmet on and is in prime time and catches the ball like Odell Beckham, and it just reels more fans in. I do think there are more female fans involved, and betting certainly has to have something to do with it. Mm-hmm. It is a fun sport to bet on, and now with betting legal in so many ways and easy to do, where you can bet at halftime or bet on a number of catches or yards, I think all those things kind of add up, and I just hope that they continue to grow, and now international is the next step. I know that makes some hometown fans a little bit unhappy, but I worry about, the oversaturation sometimes of exposure and thinning out the schedule, the ones that you're going to put in prime time. But so far, it's a powerful train running in the right direction, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. And it's fun to be a part of. It's fun to be on that ride because I just loved football anyway. And today's NFL, the pass, they've changed the rules for more offense, so the passing is making it just as exciting. And I think it's going to keep going.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, continued success, my friend. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to join us here on Dialed In today, man. I hope I get a chance to see you sometime not too far down the road.
All right. Glad to talk to you anytime, Tom. You take care.
All right, buddy. Chris Myers from Fox Sports, kind enough to join us today here on Dialed In. We thank our friends from United Dairy Farmers and Encore Technologies, as they're our sponsors for the big show. And again, we thank Chris. We thank all of you. We thank Casey McAllister. Are you all right over there, by the way?
Yeah, I'm good.
I mean, since the last time I saw you, you basically have been scalped.
What do you mean?
I mean, you cut off you had a beard, you had a mustache, you had long hair. Now you're like high and tight, kept the mustache, no beard. I mean, did your bride suggest that maybe you clean your act up or what?
Yeah, she said that it was tired. The hair was all tired. The beard not being kept was tired. And so she wanted me to change the look up, so I changed it to this. High, tight, looking like a cop.
Lindsay, I know that you're a little under the weather today. Do you think it's a better look? I mean, you can be honest now.
I think think if his wife likes it, that's all that
Boy,
matters.
what a political answer that is. Elliot, do you have any thoughts on Casey's new look before we call it a day
It's a
today?
good question, Tom. It's a really good question. I came in this morning and I almost jumped out of my chair when I saw it. I couldn't believe.
Oh, so that was today.
That's when I noticed it. That's when I noticed it was today, Tom. So I don't know what he's spewing over there. All I know is I looked at that and I jumped up in my chair. I couldn't believe what I saw. It was like it was one of those Halloween costumes you're getting at the mall. What's on top of your head right now?
I did think I was going to bring in some aviators. I think I could pull off the cop look.
You could. All right, fellas, ladies, thank you very much. We thank all of you for being with us. We'll come your way back again on Tuesday. Dialed in with Thom Brennaman. Have a good day.